So I'm here with Damon, principal of Richard Montgomery High School in Rockville, Maryland. We're just going to have a equity matters discussion around leadership for equity and anti-racism. So today I'm going to learn a little bit about Damon, his journey, and the work that he's doing at Richard Montgomery. So to kick us off, we want to talk a little bit about critical consciousness. And in the work that we've been doing over the years, we really get to critical consciousness through our three essential questions that ask about who we are as racial, cultural, ethnic beings, our understanding of others, and then how do we respond in ways which are responsive. So Damon, welcome to Equity Matters. And I want to hear about how your critical consciousness has been developed over the years.
First, Troy, thank you so much for inviting me. It's really an honor. It's always great to work with you and your team. And I mean, I think this is just so urgently important as we all know at this point. But for me, in all honesty, it does begin with who I am and where I grew up and how I grew up. I grew up in a town in Howard County, Maryland, called Columbia, Maryland, which was a planned community, planned to be integrated, no redlining. And my parents, children of the 60s, were civil rights, pro-civil rights, Vietnam protesters, hippies, if you will, and moved us there when I was 5, specifically because of the vision of integration and equality. And so I grew up, I knew what racism was, but I never really think that I saw it or was exposed to it. I grew up in a community of tolerance. My high school was about 20-something% African-American. I grew up in the mid to late 80s. And it was a world where there were interracial couples. Nobody was hiding that. At prom, there would be mixed couples having their photos taken, on parents' lawns. It was celebrated. I'm one of these white folks whose best friend is Black, right? I'm that guy, best man at my wedding, and who I've known since I was 7 years old. And it wasn't until I got to the University of Maryland that I realized I was in a bubble. And I went and walked into the dining hall, like my first day on campus, and saw the dining hall table separated by race. And from there, I was exposed to some racist comments from white folks that I hung out with. I hung around with fewer and fewer Black people at the University of Maryland, but still had my friends from back in Columbia. But when I became a teacher, my first job teaching was at Paint Branch High School in 1996, and I was a what's now called SESES, special education teacher. And I really learned how to work with all kinds of students at that point. I was a special education teacher at Bethesda Chevy Chase High School in social studies before becoming a social studies teacher there. And at Bethesda Chevy Chase in the late 90s, I taught African-American history. I taught Latin American history. I had a strong interest in those courses. I wrote my senior history thesis on the relationship between slaves and slave owners in antebellum Virginia, using primary documents. I've always had a strong interest in the African-American experience. In fact, in the fall of 1989, I was sitting in a Survey U.S. History course as a physical therapy major, and the professor held up 2 books. And he said, "You're going to read these 2 books. One is the autobiography of Malcolm X, and one is the biography of Andrew Carnegie. They are both quintessentially American stories, but for very different reasons."
Right.
And that was a life changer for me, reading the autobiography of Malcolm X. And this is before Spike Lee's film. So
right.
It was a social phenomenon at that point.
It's one of my favorite books too.
Yeah, and I just explored all of this, and I asked myself. I grew up in this liberal, progressive, good school system bubble, and Malcolm X wasn't even in my textbook, right? It was non-existent. Eyes on the Prize every year, yeah, we saw that, right? But Malcolm X was not anywhere to be seen. So, fast forward to Bethesda Chevy Chase. Nobody wanted to teach those courses. I had a strong interest in them. There was nobody of color in the department at the time. And those are some of the most rewarding experiences. I then went on to the Dominican Republic and taught for 4 years at an American International School. And being in a place where you're not completely fluent in the language and you look differently from everybody else, it gave me a completely different lens about what an experience would be. Realizing I was still white. I know it's not the same experience as an African-American in this country, but it was a different lens. Coming back to Northwood in 2006 to the county was when I really think I became a good teacher. I was forced to look at my practices and realize the same shtick I had been doing for, at that point, about 10 years at Bethesda Chevy Chase and an international school wasn't going to work at Northwood. And I had to evaluate myself and look at the mirror and look at how I was going to change my practices to meet the students in the classroom. And then my experience at Paint Branch High School for 4 years as an administrator with a school that is overwhelmingly African-American really opened my lens to the challenges that our students of color have and the areas that we fall short at the school level and frankly at the system level. And so as principal, I can remember after I got the job here, the associate superintendent at the time, Chris Guerin, said to me, Damon, the only thing you need to do when you go in is you need to look at everything through an equity lens at Richard Montgomery High School, from the IB program to the yearbook, to who's sitting in AP classes, to who is the articles are written about in the newspaper. He's like, everything. And so that was the beginning of this. What I have learned here at RM, I remember like my first week of school and an African-American student came up to me and said, hey, Monteleone, let me tell you something about RM. At RM, Black kids feel both isolated, neglected, and targeted at the same time. And it was a big eye opener. And so this has been a journey, frankly, Troy, and you can't really talk about race at this school unless you talk about that magnet program. All right. It is something that we continue to work on. And in terms of my lens, I have to tell you, I've always thought that I was leading a charge and doing the right thing. And as evidenced by a lot of the street level data and the student voice that has come up recently, we've fallen short. And I think the biggest eye opener for me, like every white person in America, I'm reading Kendi's book, and this notion of anti-racism versus not racist. And this idea of being silent and being neutral is essentially part of the problem, has really opened my eyes. So I see our work more focused than it's ever been.
Absolutely. You brought up a lot of good points through your journey, and that opportunity to leave this environment and go elsewhere to see what it looks like. So you left the bubble of Columbia and went to University of Maryland, and it looked very different. My experience was almost the reverse. I went to Sherwood High School, very similar experience, very diverse. We did have separate tables that I had to navigate back and forth from, because I just had different groups of friends. But then I went to college, and it was I went to Morehouse, and it was all male, all African American, and so that was a different experience. And for me, it helped me to embrace my Blackness and appreciate who I was even more than I had before. And as a student teacher, I just remember I had this older African-American lady with this real deep, raspy voice. And she was like, you have to change for your students, not the other way around. And that's something that I always carried with me. And really, I mean, she's talking about culturally responsive pedagogy in that it's up to you. We're highly paid, highly educated folks, and we have to make that shift. We can't leave it up to the kids. So really good points.
Absolutely. I mean, what you just said about you have to change for your kids is a key thing for me. And I ask myself this question, seriously. When our students walk, like as an administrator, as somebody who is, walking in and out of classrooms, you can walk into a classroom and you know right away if that classroom has a shared collective culture, right? Is that a shared culture in this classroom? Or is that a classroom where students are assimilating into the teacher's notion of what a classroom culture should be? Have the norm been established collectively? right? Or have they been dictated? And if you
Right.
don't follow the dictates, here's the consequences. You know what they are. And sometimes I think about our students of color and our students from all over the world, especially here at RM, who are navigating possibly 7 different cultures a day, right? And assimilating into, having to morph into what they perceive the teacher's expectations to be about how they should act.
Right.
And so I'll tell you some indication of that. I mean, I look at our referral data, and I'm going to ballpark these figures and I'll have them in front of me, but something like 2/3 of our referrals are for insubordination or disrespect.
Right.
Okay. and
what is that?
What is that? Right.
Right.
And so, and you can slice and dice that data in any number of ways. I have to say that it's in trying to lead this work, you know, if I'm looking through the critical consciousness, right, lens of a leader, one of the most difficult things for a white person, and I'm just going to say it, is I will never, ever pretend to know what it's like to be a black person or a black man in this country, ever. I've never had to have the talk with my children. I told my children about the talk that black folks have to have with their kids,
Right.
but I'll never have to do that, right? I don't fear for myself if I go jogging. When I get pulled over, I'm not thinking 2 hands, 10 and 2,
Right.
right? And may I go into the glove compartment?
Right.
I don't know. I'm trying to lead this work, frankly, from somewhat of a limited experience, a very limited experience, and an uninformed position. And so it's incumbent upon me to try to work with all of our black staff and our black students and our black and, you know, people of color community to lead this. On the other hand, Troy, I'm very well aware that we shouldn't necessarily have to go to our students of color and say, hey, it's your job to wake up all the white folks in the building. Right. To our black staff and say, hey, sorry we've been doing this for 400 years, but can you help us out here, change this?
Right.
So it's a very fine line as a white person who wants to do this work, how you approach that. I'm just being honest.
No, it's true.
With my African-American colleagues.
It's as a system, it is incumbent, since, you know, white staff members are the majority of, at least on our professional side of the staff, you know, you're going to be the ones that make the change, you know. So doing the work that's going to involve is really not, it's not up to people of color to do that work. A, there's not enough of us, and B, that's not our role. But our role is to help build this better system that works for, you know, our students, their families, and staff, so that everybody has a seat at the table. And speaking of that, let's talk about the idea of, who wasn't invited to dinner. And so I want to hear your thinking about this notion of the work. Who's missing from the table?
Wow, this is pretty heavy. So, I mean, as you're aware, and as I'm sure everybody at MCPS and probably most of the community is aware, that there has been this proliferation of these black at Instagram accounts over the last month or so at many schools. RM certainly being one. And this, I mean, this is so painful to read these.
Right.
But I think that it's a clear indicator of who hasn't been invited to dinner, whose voice, so to speak, has not been recognized, and whose perspective is not, I mean, to use the metaphor, at the dinner table when the dinner conversations are being had.
Right.
And, you know, we have been doing student surveys and student data, community circles, study circles, all of this stuff for so long. And it obviously has fallen short. And so this has been a huge eye opener for me, right? I think that, you know, I'm looking at a school, and again, I go back to the magnet program. I think in 2014, when I became principal, we had less than 10% combined Black and Hispanic population in the magnet. we did not guarantee seats to any students from Julius West. They had to apply like everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
The 11th grade students couldn't just choose to do a diploma program here like they could at any other diploma program school. They were
Right.
clearly not invited to the magnet dinner table or the IB diploma dinner table.
Right.
When the IB mission statement clearly states that it's a program, it's a full school program for all to make the world a
Right.
better place. So how
Right.
can you make the world a better place if you're segregating half the world?
Right.
Like 70% of the world. So, that's all of this has been an issue. I started something this summer frankly, based upon some consultation and some conversations with one of my Black staff members, a woman that I've known for 10 years. I worked with in other schools, who had the trust to come and speak to me and said,
Right.
"Hey, Damon, you ought to start a Black staff affinity group and invite only Black staff to speak with you, so you can be in a space that you're not in." Mm-hmm. and they can essentially be in a space with you that they may not often get to. And we're talking about cafeteria staff, paraeducators, security, teachers,
Right.
administrators, everybody. And that has been the meetings that we've had this summer have been some of the most powerful, the first one especially, eye-opening experience. I've heard the truth of so many folks. I heard stories about their lives, experiences, where they're from, their grandparents, great-grandparents. And what, I often say to our staff, our students don't check their life experiences at the door. They don't walk into your classroom as an empty, objective learning vessel.
Right.
They're bringing everything they hear about people that look like them into your classroom.
Right.
You have to know that and build relationships predicated upon that. One of the things that never occurred to me was our staff, same thing. They're not coming in as objective teaching vessels,
Right.
educators. And that it's really incumbent upon us as leaders to talk with people. I've done more listening and frankly more learning since May 25th in this area than ever before. And you're not going to learn this stuff out of a book, right? You're not going to learn it out of the book du jour of the summer months. And so the point of, I had a meeting yesterday with the president of the SGA, the president of the Black Student Union, the president of the Minority Scholars Program, the president of our Super PAC. Another thing you may know, we have close to 5,000 signatures from a student-led organization that wants to change the name of the school because Richard Montgomery was a slaveholder.
Right.
And I met with the students there. I've always met with student leaders, but it's different. We're not just seeking voice anymore, or using student voice as a prop to try to create a sense of agency. Students need to be co-equal partners at the high school level, especially co-equal partners in this work from the ground up.
Right.
We shouldn't go for lagging data to see how we're doing after policy is implemented.
Right.
We need to get student voice at that dinner table, right? When that policy is created.
Right.
And that's really where we've moved. And the same thing for the Black Staff Affinity Group. The goal there is to ensure that our Black staff have a voice, and for me to be able to listen consistently. This will go on as long as I'm here as principal. And for that collective voice to be representative at the instructional leadership team, dinner table when decisions are being made. So these are all the kinds of the revelations that I've had. But there's still a lot of work to do, Troy.
Oh, absolutely.
In all areas, but specifically in who's not invited to the IB dinner table. Right.
I mean, that's really, the work that you're doing, the point you made about having kids at the table from the onset and not just superficially collect student voice data to say that we did it. But if you're going to do it and you're going to involve voice from staff, from students, it needs to be actionable. So because I call that the evidence of equity. So we can, go to trainings and do those good things, but until it transfers into your day-to-day practice, that should be evident in different ways. It doesn't mean anything. And people are going to come back to school differently and be looking for things. They're going to be looking for your evidence of anti-racism, your evidence of equity. And so how are you going to demonstrate that? And I think you are. But that's something that I want, really want people to start to think about. What does that look like? How are you going to show me that when I send my kid to your school, that they're going to get the very best that you have to offer and not the shaft?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, well, I mean, I can tell you right now, I'm really proud of the work that our leaders have done since May 25th. And we're working to essentially the evidence of equity. I love that. I'm probably going to steal it, if you don't mind.
It's all yours. Nope, take it.
Credit. But but what has been, the other side to this coin, right? What has been inspirational is the rallying that the staff has done and the community and the students have done. We immediately started, essentially, we had about 50 or 60 staff who came to a series of voluntary staff meetings right after May 25th,
Right.
George Floyd week, if you will, Breonna Taylor, all of that. And out of that, those just conversations where it was just a lot of just listening and in the social emotional realm, right? In the moral realm, so to speak. And we've moved into really the action realm. So we developed a series of, we have 5 different anti-racist work groups who are hard at work and different goals this summer. We have a book club. We have a group that's studying anti-racist literature, research, articles. We have a group who's looking at explicitly anti-racist pedagogy and anti-racist staff development to work with us on our learning progression this year. We have a group that's looking at an ongoing system of student voice and community voice collection and acting on that.
Right.
And we also have 5 different instructional leadership team work groups, and we're working with study circles. We really, one of the things we did this during our instructional leadership team week was we took those Black at Instagram posts and we said, okay, we're not going to shy away from this. We're going to embrace this, right? And we looked at it through an equity lens. We looked at it through a diversity lens. We looked at it through an inclusion lens.
Right.
And we said, which of these, now let's take what students are saying.
Right.
And where does this fall? Does it fall under diversity, inclusion, equity, right?
Right.
And what are the action steps that we're going to take? And my challenge to each of the instructional leadership team members was, you basically have 3 roles as a high school resource teacher. You lead in your classroom, you lead in your department, and you lead as a member of ILT. And so our goal is to come back on August 5th and say, all right, what is our commitment? How are we committed to leading for anti-racism in each of those realms?
Right.
And that is the focus for all staff at Richard Montgomery moving forward, as long as I'm here, is the expectation is that you are going to be actively pursuing your role as an anti-racist educator at Richard Montgomery High School, wherever you are on that journey.
Right. Right.
And that you are going to be planning purposefully with anti-racist pedagogy and reviewing your content to see if that content is applicable, meaningful, relevant to the students that are sitting in front of you and represents experiences. So there's a lot happening, and I can't say enough about the team that I work with because I've kind of been able to set the rudder in a certain direction.
Right.
And people just run with it. And it's been really, really inspiring. But now it's time to create those structures and processes to make sure that work with kids in the classroom.
Right.
It's time to get into a plan, do, study, act cycle to see if there is that evidence of equity. And frankly, it's time to have systems of accountability to ensure that folks are doing the right thing.
Right. So talking about, doing the right thing, the idea that some of the structures we have in place now create winners and losers, and as if it's a competition or a race or the Olympics. Somebody has to win and somebody has to lose. But what this work really talks about is how we create a situation where everybody wins, no matter where you are on the continuum. So just tell me a little bit about that idea of winners and losers as it relates to the work that you're trying to accomplish at your school.
Yeah. So again, I go back to I go back to our 4-year magnet program, to be honest with you. I think that regardless of the work we've done, so it used to be 100 kids from all over the county were entered that program in 9th grade. As I said, we had fewer than 10% African-American, Black, Hispanic combined in that program. Now it's a little over 20%. Better, not where it should be. In the last 6 years, we've been able to allocate 25 to 30 geographic seats to Julius West students out of 9th grade. We've completely opened up the 2-year diploma program, which is part of that 4-year magnet,
Right.
To every student at Richard Montgomery High School. Our IB diploma coordinator, Nancy Shea, visits every single 10th grade English class on level. Well, we don't have on level anymore. Every
Right.
single English class, every single ESOL class, and goes in and pitches the program in 10th grade saying, this program is for you if you want to do it.
Right.
And we have a self-identifying Google form, and we have a process of students there. We've been able to have between 40 and 70 students over the last few years enter the program. So from 100 students that were from all over the county,
Right.
largely white and Asian, we've had our diploma class this year was 168,
Oh, wow.
as diverse as ever, and with a 95% pass rate or IB diploma graduation rate.
Wow.
So you can increase equity and
Right.
maintain increased success. However,
Absolutely.
what we found is that students are still not accessing this because they don't see themselves in the classroom.
Right.
They don't see themselves in the content.
Mm-hmm.
And we have, this program, which should be ostensibly the most unifying program in the school, based upon the mission statement of the IBO, has historically been one of the most divisive. And it has created winners and losers in the school. And the existential challenge, frankly, of my role as principal is figuring out a way to maintain the level of rigor and the opportunity for accelerated students who deserve an accelerated pathway, while not opening the door for other students who may not have had the privileges that the accelerated learners had since pre-K,
Right.
but now have the opportunity to access with the same results. And this, frankly, is where our work needs to continue. Whether we like it or not, the perception of students of color is that our program is for white and Asian kids.
Right. Right. Right.
Not for, and there's something that we've been talking about recently a lot of stuff we've been reading about: intent versus impact.
Impact. Yep.
And there's the intent of our processes and our structures, our programs, our policies, and there's the impact. And so we can't just rest on the laurels of what we intend when we revise policy and program to open up access.
Right.
We have to look at its intent. Its impact. So I really believe that right now we have to address this notion of who wins and who loses.
Right.
And we have, I've been doing a lot of reading, a lot of thinking about not institutional barriers,
Right.
not institutional structures, but racist barriers or racist
Right.
structures.
Right.
We can all look at the history of the magnet programs in Montgomery County, and there is a clear racial social context for their origin.
Right. Right.
And let's be honest, right? Like, the program was put here for Richard Montgomery in the 80s because population was declining. Similar situation at Blair.
Right.
If you look at the schools, I have somebody knocking at my window. Can you hold one second?
Yep. Uh-huh.
Miss Hernandez, can you open the front door? Ozzy, open the front door. Tell them to wait. Sorry.
That's all right. Hey, you doing the work.
Yeah. Sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
No, that was a real moment. But just, I think you were talking about, just continuing to examine those practices that,
Thank you.
The intent of.
The policies and the programs, right? So I think that if we look at the history of that there, and even like look at the schools now where the IB new regional magnets are.
Right.
They are Springbrook, right? Kennedy,
right.
Watkins Mill. These are schools that have a large, if not overwhelmingly majority, student of color population. It's great
Right.
that these programs are there. They were already there, right?
Right. Right.
Students of color to access.
Right.
So when we draw in other students into these schools, I
Right.
do worry about continuing, right, a school within a school model where the
Right.
local students are students of color and the
Mhm.
students who access this program are not. And so I realize this is partially an issue above my pay grade, but it's something I live with every single day and I'm working
Yeah.
at. And I think that when we have the intent of creating programs and access like this, and as a
Right.
leader of a program like that, we also have to
Right.
look at the impact of what it does to the culture of a school.
Right. Because are we replicating racism?
Okay. And,
You know?
and it is this, if I don't use this language lightly, it probably is the single most segregating factor in this building. If you walk into classrooms,
Mm-hmm.
if you're just going to walk into classrooms and look at who's sitting in the classroom,
Right. Right.
when buses pull up in the morning, and you can see who's walking off the bus.
Right. Right.
Right. I mean, this is the reality, Troy.
Oh, and the thing is, the really deep part about this, we just imagine a world where there was no TV, there was no social media, and no one ever talked about race, racism, and inequities.
Mm-hmm.
By virtue of going to school, from pre-K to 12th grade, just by going to school, you see these patterns emerge, and we don't even have to talk about it. And that's the deep aspect of it. When people don't talk about race and don't talk about these things with kids and those kind of things, because of various reasons, if we don't, they're still getting it in, because all you got to do is go to school and you see who's in what class, who gets what opportunities, who gets to go to this after school club because they have the $300 to pay for it, you know. So you see it all the time. So it's just deep, and that's the real work. Is like, how do we change that picture that kids see, and adults, because it reinforces some beliefs that you know, educators and families have about students that look different than them. How do we change that picture? We need a new movie.
Exactly. And I think when people look at students, say student A tries hard, it's a meritocracy here, student B does not, student B does not care. What we fail to take, I mean, what we fail to take into perspective is 400 years of history, right? And I don't need to quote Lyndon Johnson. I don't need to quote Malcolm X. I don't need to quote Martin Luther King about when folks are so behind just the baseline, right, of opportunity, just to bring them up to say, okay, well, now everything's cool and you're equal. That is not enough,
That's
right?
Not
we
enough.
have to, not just 400 years, but we have to look at the 14 years previous to the students getting here, and what their experiences are, right? And take all that in consideration. I think one of the biggest pedagogical challenges is the notion of, and I taught AP, right? And I taught high flyers, like academic high flyers.
Right.
But you think you can teach in a monolithic way. And the idea for differentiation is, oh, that's for honors, that's for on level. No, it's not, right? We have students who come into our classroom, and we need to be able to figure out where they are, and we need to be able to be nimble in our practices to get them to the same finish line. The idea of, I teach here, and it's your job to get there. And if you do, great. And if you don't, I'm moving anyway. No, that's gotta be over.
No. Well, Damon, this has been a really good conversation. I've really enjoyed connect. I have to make this part of my normal practice, even if it's not film, just to have these conversations, because it just helps me, you know, develop my lens and even deepen my appreciation for what principals in this system are doing to create better conditions for our kids, especially our kids that we've underserved for so long. So it gives me hope to keep on going. And, you know, the equity unit's here when you need us. And any support we can give, or you want to just share some of the good work you're doing, let me know. But I just wish you a great summer, and thank you so much for giving me a little bit of your busy time to just have this conversation.
Thank you. Hey, yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and you know, we're just knee deep in it, and the fight's the fight and the work's the work. I appreciate your time, Troy. Okay, best to
Thank
you
you.
and your loved ones. Okay, all right.